Welcome to the Christian Book Podcast. This channel is dedicated to exploring best-selling books that aim to inspire your daily life. Let's jump straight into this week's discussion.
Okay, so get this. We've got this excerpt from Marilyn Hickey's The Power of Prayer and Fasting.
Wow, that's a powerful topic.
Right. And it's so interesting. It's not what you might think. We're going to explore like her personal experiences and some really interesting stories from the Bible.
Intriguing.
Yeah, and practical tips too.
Oh, so it's not just, theoretical, it's like stuff we can actually use.
Exactly. And what I found really fascinating is that it doesn't present fasting as this rigid, one-size-fits-all practice.
Right. Yeah, like you have to give up everything and just suffer.
Yeah, it really challenges that traditional view of deprivation,
Interesting. So how does she approach it?
Well, Hickey shares her own routine, and it's actually pretty unique. She fasts 7 meals per week, but on a totally flexible schedule.
So not like a whole day or anything?
Nope, not at all. It's not about abstaining from all food for a set period, more about strategically choosing when to fast.
That makes a lot more sense. Like making it work for your life, not the other way around.
Exactly. And when you think about the church's annual 21 days of prayer and fasting that she mentions, it's less about deprivation and more about this intentional spiritual discipline.
I see. Yeah, it's like a focused effort, right?
Right. And she talks about some pretty remarkable benefits people have reported, feeling like a renewed sense of purpose, having prayers answered, even feeling more connected to their community. But here's a question for you. Have you ever felt like your prayers hit a ceiling?
I think we've all been there, right? Where it's like you're pouring your heart out, but it feels like nothing's getting through.
Exactly. And that leads right into what Hickey says about fasting, helping us shift our focus away from, the material world and towards God.
Right. It's like clearing out the clutter, so to speak.
Yeah, it's so true. Like, think about it. We are constantly bombarded with distractions these days. Social media, Netflix, and that extra slice of pizza. We're like mini Adam and Eves, tempted by all these like forbidden fruits.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that.
But fasting helps us hit that reset button on our desires so we can actually tune in and hear God's voice.
So it's like creating that space to hear more clearly. Yeah.
Exactly. And Hickey uses that analogy of Adam and Eve to highlight how easily our focus can be pulled away from what truly matters.
It's so easy to get sidetracked, isn't it?
It really is. It's like she's saying, hey, let's get real. We all struggle with this. And she emphasizes how fasting can actually help us understand God's will and commit to actions that line up with it.
So it's not just about skipping meals, it's about aligning our hearts and minds with something bigger.
Exactly.
Powerful stuff.
It is. And speaking of bigger things, Hickey dives into the biblical basis for fasting, highlighting its historical and spiritual significance. She uses some really powerful stories, like David's week-long fast for his son, to show how deeply personal this practice can be.
Wow, a week. That's some serious dedication.
I know, right? You could just feel the weight of David's devotion. It was like he was saying, nothing else matters right now except praying for my son's life. Have you ever felt that level of desperation in your own prayer life?
I think we all have those moments where it's like everything else fades away and all that matters is that one thing you're praying for.
Exactly. And then she shares this amazing story about the Swiss mother who fasted for 7 days for her son's healing. Talk about persistence.
Wow, that's incredible.
It really is. It shows how powerful prayer can be when it's combined with that level of faith and the fact that her son had this incredible recovery.
It adds another layer of wonder to the whole concept of fasting, for sure.
It does. These stories suggest that fasting can actually amplify the intensity and focus of our prayers, creating a space where we can be more receptive to God's presence and guidance.
It's like tuning out the static so you can hear the signal more clearly.
Exactly. Hickey also talks about the importance of praise and thanksgiving during fasting, even when things are tough. She uses David as an example again, this time focusing on his reaction after his son passed away. Instead of staying stuck in grief, he shifted from petitionary prayer to praising God's sovereignty.
That's a powerful shift in perspective.
It is. It suggests that fasting can help us move beyond just asking for what we want and, find peace in God's ultimate plan, even when we don't fully understand it.
It's about surrendering to his will, right?
Right. It's like we're rewiring our brains to trust God more deeply no matter what's going on around us. And she even points out how our requests change when we start with gratitude. We gain a new perspective and start asking for things that are more in line with God's will.
That's a really important takeaway. It's not about trying to force God to do what we want, but about surrendering to his will.
Exactly. And practically speaking, Hickey provides a really helpful step-by-step guide for those who are thinking about giving fasting a try. Because, we all have our cravings and our habits.
Right. Yeah, it can be daunting to think about giving something up.
She suggests easing into it gradually. So first, cutting back on things like caffeine, sugar, red meat, alcohol for a few days.
So like a detox phase.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
And then in stage 2, you transition to a diet that's mainly fruits and vegetables.
Sounds pretty healthy.
It is. She even has this recipe for a cleansing soup that supposedly takes more calories to digest than it actually contains.
Wait, what? You burn calories by eating it?
That's what she says. It sounds pretty intriguing. And she addresses those common side effects people experience while fasting. Headaches, fatigue, and reassures readers that those usually fade away after a few days.
That's good to know. It's not like you're going to be miserable the whole time.
No, not at all. It's a really balanced and thoughtful approach, emphasizing preparation and gradual transitions.
Makes sense. You don't want to shock your system.
Exactly. But I'm particularly interested in how she breaks down the 12 purposes of fasting described in Isaiah 58. Because it's not just about personal discipline. It's about how it impacts the world around us.
Yeah, I'm curious about that too. What are some of the purposes she highlights?
Well, let's start with loosing the bands of wickedness, which she links to facing those stubborn sins we all struggle with and overcoming unbelief, those things that just keep tripping us up.
We all have those.
She uses a story about a pastor who felt called to Louisville, even though everyone warned him it was a terrible place for preachers.
So he went against the grain.
He did. He felt like God was calling him there, even though it didn't make sense to anyone else.
That takes a lot of faith.
It does. And it shows the importance of trusting God's direction over human opinions and what can happen when we don't fully obey his call. It makes you think, are we willing to let go of our fears and doubts to follow God's lead?
Even when it seems counterintuitive.
Exactly. Even when it doesn't make sense. And then there's undoing heavy burdens, which Hickey emphasizes the need for God's wisdom and plan when we feel completely overwhelmed. Because, let's be honest, who hasn't felt that way at some point?
Oh, for sure. Life can get pretty heavy sometimes.
It can. And she shares the story of Ezra, who fasted during a difficult journey and experienced God's protection and guidance. It's a tangible example of how fasting can lead to divine intervention and practical solutions in those situations that seem impossible.
Like creating space for God to work by surrendering our worries and seeking his guidance.
Yes, and then there's breaking every yoke.
Yeah.
Hickey applies this to healthy and unhealthy relationships, especially at work. Sometimes we get caught up in situations that compromise our values.
Right, those gray areas where it's hard to know what's right.
Exactly. She tells the story of Tom at a business trip where he was pressured to do something unethical. It highlights the courage it takes to stand against what's wrong, even when there's a personal cost.
It's so easy to just go along with the crowd, even when you know it's not right.
It is. But Hickey encourages us to examine those areas where we might be entangled in unhealthy alliances and seek God's guidance in breaking free. It's about having the courage to say no when everyone else is saying yes.
Standing up for what you believe in, even when it's hard.
Exactly. And finally, there's bringing healing speedily. This one connects to food choices, emotional dependencies, and the possibility of transformation, not just spiritually, but physically too. She tells an amazing story about a doctor who fasted for extended periods, like 40 days or more.
Wow, that's a long time.
I know, right? And reportedly, he ended up looking decades younger.
Seriously? Like Benjamin Button.
It sounds crazy, right?
Yeah.
But it's like fasting creates this ripple effect, impacting all areas of our lives. It's not just about food. It's about aligning our entire being, spirit, soul, and body with God's purpose.
That's a powerful thought.
It is. And it's just the beginning of what we'll be exploring in this deep dive into Hickey's book. It's amazing how Hickey connects these purposes of fasting to real-world issues. Like she talks about let the oppressed go free, and it really makes you think about freedom on a whole new level.
It's not just about external circumstances, right? It's about those internal battles we all face, the anxieties, the fears, the negative thoughts that can make us feel trapped. Hickey points out that sometimes the oppression isn't the actual situation, it's our reaction to it.
It's so true. It's like we build these mental and emotional prisons for ourselves. And she reminds us that even when things feel overwhelming, we always have a choice in how we respond.
She uses that story of Samuel who fasted when the Israelites were being oppressed by the Philistines. It shows the power of collective prayer and fasting to completely turn around a hopeless situation.
It's like their unified prayer created a space for God to step in and do what only He could do. And Hickey offers some really practical tips for how we could apply this to our own lives, like facing those fears and doubts head on and identifying the things that are making us feel trapped.
Remember that anecdote she shares about the woman who was told to turn off her TV after 6:00 p.m. as part of her fast? Turns out all those violent news stories and crime dramas were actually fueling her anxiety and making her feel like the world was a scary place.
It's amazing how those subtle influences can creep in and affect our emotional well-being. By removing that negativity, she was able to break free from that cycle of fear and experience a sense of peace. It makes you wonder, what are some of those TVs in our own lives that we might need to switch off?
That's a powerful question. And Hickey talks about the importance of replacing those negative influences with positive ones. Reading the Bible, listening to uplifting music, spending time in nature. It's about being intentional, about creating an environment that nourishes our souls.
It's like taking control of our thought life and choosing to focus on things that align with God's truth. What a powerful antidote to fear and oppression.
Absolutely. And then she dives into another purpose of fasting, feed the hungry. But she goes beyond just physical hunger, which is so insightful.
Right. She talks about emotional hunger, which I think is so relevant in our world today. We're constantly bombarded with messages telling us we need more stuff, more food, more experiences. It's like we're trying to fill this emptiness inside with things that can never truly satisfy.
It's like trying to fill a bottomless pit. And Hickey points out that those cravings for comfort food, especially the unhealthy kind, are often masking deeper emotional needs that aren't being met.
She uses the story of Elijah and the widow to illustrate the importance of trusting God to provide, even when it seems like there's not enough.
That story reminds us that God's provision often comes in ways we least expect. And when we let go of our worries and trust in His abundance, He can multiply what little we have.
It's about shifting our focus from what we lack to the limitless resources of our Heavenly Father.
Hickey encourages us to use fasting as a time to reevaluate our relationship with food, both physically and emotionally. It's about asking God to show us how much we should be eating, not just during the fast, but in our everyday lives.
It's about seeking His guidance in creating healthy habits and breaking free from those emotional dependencies that can lead to overeating or unhealthy food choices.
And of course, she acknowledges those sneaky lies the enemy might try to whisper in our ears during this process. Things like, you deserve this treat, or your weight doesn't really matter.
It's so important to be aware of those deceptive thoughts and to combat them with the truth of God's Word, which affirms our value and reminds us that our bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit. We're called to take care of them.
Absolutely. And speaking of taking care of things, Hickey also challenges us to consider how we can provide for the poor as another purpose of fasting. It's not just about writing a check, although that's important too. It's about finding tangible ways to help those in need.
She highlights lending a helping hand, offering job opportunities, and being generous with what we have. She even shares that incredible story from the book of Acts about Paul's shipwreck on the island of Malta. Even though he and his companions were in a desperate situation themselves, they still found ways to show compassion and generosity to the islanders.
It's such a beautiful example of how we can be a blessing to others, even when we're going through tough times ourselves. It's a reminder that our generosity can actually open doors for God to work in miraculous ways.
Hickey encourages us to be open to God's leading when it comes to giving. It's about being good stewards of everything He's entrusted to us, our time, our talents, our resources, and it's about confronting those lies that try to hold us back from being generous, like the fear of scarcity or the belief that we don't have enough to share.
It's a powerful reminder that true abundance flows from a heart of generosity. When we give freely, we open ourselves up to receive God's blessings in amazing ways.
And speaking of abundance, I love how Hickey ties fasting to the idea of restoring family relationships. It's about tearing down those walls that separate us and letting God rebuild those broken connections.
It's so easy to hide from the people closest to us, whether it's physically, emotionally, or spiritually. But Hickey challenges us to confront those difficult situations head-on, just like Esther did when she risked her life to intercede for her people.
That's a powerful reminder that sometimes the most courageous act of love is to step out in faith and face those challenges even when it feels risky or uncomfortable.
Absolutely. And Hickey encourages us to take a good look at our own family relationships and ask God to reveal any areas where we might be holding back or harboring unforgiveness. It's about seeking his help and letting go of those hurts and extending grace to those who have wounded us.
It's about recognizing that true healing and reconciliation start in our own hearts. And it's about praying for the salvation of our family members, trusting that God is working in their lives, even when we don't see it.
And then finally, we come to bringing healing speedily. This one's fascinating because it addresses both physical and emotional healing. Hickey acknowledges that many of the health problems we face today are connected to our lifestyle choices, especially what we eat.
She emphasizes fasting as a way to cleanse our bodies, break free from those unhealthy habits, and create a healthier relationship with food. But it goes deeper than that. She also talks about the emotional roots of many health issues.
It's like she's saying, hey, let's get real. Sometimes we eat our feelings. And fasting can help us address those underlying emotional needs that are driving us to seek comfort in food or other unhealthy behaviors.
It's about realizing that true healing involves the whole person, spirit, soul, and body. And she shares some incredible stories about the health benefits people have experienced through fasting. Like that story about Dr. Henry Tanner, who reportedly fasted for long periods and looked way younger than his actual age.
Those stories are definitely intriguing, but it's important to remember that Hickey stresses seeking medical guidance before doing any prolonged fasts. It's about approaching fasting with wisdom and discernment, knowing that everyone's body is different.
It's about listening to your body and being responsible.
Yeah.
But even more than that, she emphasizes the spiritual dimension of healing, recognizing that ultimately God is the source of all healing. It's about surrendering our worries to him and trusting in his power.
It's about seeking wholeness in every area of our lives, physically, emotionally, and spiritually.
It's really amazing how she connects fasting to not just personal things, but bigger ideas, like societal change, revival even.
Yeah, it's not all about you. It's about impacting the world around you too.
Exactly. And one of the purposes she focuses on is this light breaking forth as the morning. What a powerful image.
Yeah, I love that. Like a sense of new beginnings.
Yeah.
Darkness being pushed back by God's presence.
It makes me think of those moments when you're praying and suddenly everything feels different. Like a fog has lifted.
Yeah.
And you can see things more clearly.
Ah.
Hickey connects this purpose of fasting to seeking a deeper understanding of God's truth and experiencing a fresh outpouring of the Holy Spirit.
She uses the example of Daniel, right? Who fasted for 3 weeks and had this incredible revelations about God's plan.
Yes. It's a great reminder that sometimes we need to step away from all the noise and distractions of life to really hear what God is saying.
To create that space to listen.
Exactly. And Daniel's prayer during that fast, wow, so raw and honest, filled with humility and this deep longing for God to move. It's a model for anyone who's seeking that kind of spiritual breakthrough.
You can just feel his desperation, but also his complete surrender to God's will.
It's powerful. And Hickey points out something really important. During those times of seeking God, we need to be prepared for the lies the enemy will try to throw at us.
Oh yeah, for sure. He doesn't want us to get closer to God.
Right. Those whispers that say we're too far gone, or that God could never forgive us. We have to be so careful to guard our minds and stay focused on the truth.
Anchoring ourselves in his love and promises.
Yes. And speaking of aligning ourselves with God, another purpose Hickey talks about is establishing a path of righteousness. It's about seeking his guidance in every area of our lives and walking in obedience to his commands.
It's about living a life that's pleasing to God.
Right, exactly. Like John the Baptist, who lived such a disciplined life, fasting and praying, preparing the way for Jesus. It's like he was totally dedicated to living a life that was, in line with God's will.
Such a powerful example.
It is. And Hickey points out that creating a path of righteousness often involves a process of purification, a refining fire that burns away those things that are hindering our relationship with God.
Oh, that's good.
She uses that analogy of new wine being poured into new wineskins. Sometimes God's new thing requires us to let go of old patterns, old ways of thinking, even old relationships that aren't healthy for us anymore.
Making space for him to do something new.
Exactly. And it can be a stretching experience for sure. But it's in those times of surrender that we really see God's transformative power at work. And finally, we have revealing the glory of the Lord. Hickey connects this to those moments when God shows up in incredible, undeniable ways.
So like when he just blows us away.
Yes. She uses the example of Jehoshaphat, who called for a fast when his nation was facing a massive threat from 3 enemy armies.
Wow, talk about being outnumbered.
I know. Total David and Goliath situation.
Yeah.
But Jehoshaphat chose to put his trust in God even when the odds seemed impossible. And what happened? God showed up in a major way and delivered them. It reminds us that even when things look bleak, God is still working behind the scenes.
We just have to trust him.
Exactly. It's about shifting our focus from the problem to the solution, from the storm to the one who calms the seas. And Hickey talks about the importance of praising God even in the midst of the battle, recognizing that his power is always at work, even when we can't see it. This deep dive into Hickey's book has been eye-opening. It's challenged me to think differently about fasting, to see it as more than just a religious ritual, but a powerful tool for growth transformation, and even making a difference in the world.
I completely agree. It's clear that fasting isn't about deprivation, but about creating space for God to work in our lives in extraordinary ways. It's about deepening our connection with him and allowing his power to flow through us.
So as we wrap up, we encourage you to take some time to reflect on everything we've discussed. What is God calling you to fast from in your own life? What breakthrough might be waiting for you on the other side of that surrender? It's an exciting invitation to step into a deeper relationship with him and experience the transformative power of prayer and fasting.
Thank you for tuning in. We hope this discussion has shed more light on the topic. Join us next week for another exciting episode featuring a best-selling Christian book. Stay blessed.